Hey everyone, the Varietal Show is back. I hope you guys are having a great day. And I gotta say one thing. I am here in Knights Valley. This is a great area that a lot of people have not come to. But if you go down Highway 29 in Napa Valley and you kind of keep just going straight, you kind of come the back route to Healdsburg. And if you go to Healdsburg and you're staying in Healdsburg and you're going the back route to Calistoga, it's about the same route, and it is so magical here. And so there's things about looking at Mount St. Helena, which is right behind us here, but it's also about finding small vineyards that are so special to you. And as sommelier, I mean, I'm looking all over the globe and all these places of the world to find these areas, and who would have known that it would have been in my area that I grew up in? Oh my God. So Knights Valley is a real appellation in Sonoma County, even though we are technically in the mailboxes in Calistoga. So it is a fantastic area to visit, and I hope that you guys will all drive through it. But first of all and foremost is just knowing that this is one of the great wine regions of Northern California. And to do my kind of like little presentation right here, I wanted to bring you to an amazing vineyard that I've really gotten to know recently. And this is the Petrified Forest Vineyard and the Totem Ridge Vineyard in particular. So the label, as we can see right here, Petrified Forest. One of the amazing museums I went to as a child. Yet it still has an effect on all of us here in Sonoma County because it's really the Mayacamas Mountains. And right here where we're at with my great friends who I'm going to introduce in just a moment, we are in a hot zone by nature, which is fairly warm for Sonoma County, but it's also cool and the most rained on of Sonoma County. So isn't that crazy how this all works together? But it's really about the hillside that we're looking down. And as I said, Mayacamas is right behind us, but that's Mount St. Helena right there. So Petrified Forest is an amazing brand that was started in 2009 by my good friends, doctors Ken and Susan. And this is the Peters family. But the fact is that we've got two doctors here. You guys fell in love with wine. You came and invested in this property back in 1986, before Merlot really went to the sky as far as the big sales and everything that was going on with Merlot at that point. You planted some grapes here. Your first 10 acres was Merlot and Cabernet Sauvignon. And you went up to the top of this mountain, which was crazy talk. 800 feet up there, in fact. And you also were really into Sauvignon Blanc, which came with this property. And you figured out the ways to make this into great grapes. If you saw the last reel that we did, it was about the Cabernet Sauvignon, and it was about the regular Sauvignon Blanc that you release on a regular basis. But the fact is that the Merlot might be like that little touching part of my heart. You don't find this many great Merlots as far as hillside Merlots that really make a difference. And I feel that this is one of the ones. So let's talk a little bit about Merlot, you guys. I mean, here we are in Merlot land. Believe it, if you saw Sideways, it's a good movie to see. And I'll say why is that I feel like the love affair there was not exactly, it seemed like it wasn't about Merlot, but that's what him and his ex-wife loved to drink together. And the fact is that what is he drinking at the end? Cheval Blanc, Merlot. He's got Merlot in that bottle. And the fact is that we've needed to clean up the act on Merlot for a long time, but we had to find the right vineyards to do it. I feel like this is one of those vineyards. Very, very prestigious and very special. So let's talk about Merlot, you guys. What got you into Merlot?
The experiment with Merlot was an accident, actually, as many things are with wine. We actually planted with the thought that Cabernet, which might have needed a blend with Merlot, was the way to go. So we planted 10 acres up at an elevation of 800 feet. And we decided to go 80% Cabernet, 20% Merlot, so that we had the potential to blend as much Merlot as was legally acceptable. It turned out that the Merlot did better than the Cabernet. It was a better fit for the terroir and the location and the clone. And all we kept hearing about was how good the Merlot was. And the Cabernet, while it was always, acceptable or excellent, it did not shine like the Merlot did. So I have no explanation for why things in nature work the way they do, but there's a natural affinity for Merlot in this property. And I think we produce Merlot that is as good as any Merlot on this earth, right from this location, which is Knights Valley.
Knights Valley, of all places, you guys. I mean, this is why I just am fascinated by this, and why involving you in this conversation is so cool. We really have had some distinctions about Merlot, and I feel like right now in America, we're making the best Merlots we've ever made. And it's because a lot of the stuff has been pulled out, and the fact is that the high quality people that really believed in it are still doing it, and it will come back. Do not doubt me that will be a trend again. But why did it start that way is because women actually got Merlot first. They got it before they got Pinot, they got it before they got Grenache, they got it before all those things. Women get this. Men might go a little bit more towards the bold or the spicy, and women are looking for refined. And what does work with food? And to be really honest, Susan, I mean, you love food, I love food. What got you into Merlot?
What got me into Merlot was it was really my first my first love.
You were down in Long Beach, weren't you?
Exactly. I was in Long Beach, and I was just learning about wines, and I was fortunate enough to have a really good wine shop in the area, and I tasted a few things, and the Merlot was the one that grabbed me.
Yeah.
And it's weird because why would I remember that so many years later? And yet I did.
Yeah, and I brought it up today, and you brought that story up immediately.
Because it's one of those things. It's kind of like your first love.
Yeah.
Not
you. Not you.
Sorry, but
Okay.
but I mean, you can't count all those wines that you had when you were in post college. The Mateus Rosé, you can't count those.
No,
This
that's
was
where
the
you put
first
the
serious-
wax candles in and stuff.
This
like
was the
like
first serious wine
Yeah.
that I had, and it's still memorable today. And I wish I could remember which one it was, but I can't.
Well, the fact is that Merlot was so popular, before Sideways came out, and I think that the thing about Sideways was that it really did help propagate the fact that we were not going in the right direction with Merlot. Merlot, if you're gonna be serious about it, be serious about it. Plant it in the right places. It's not out there as a commodity. It's about quality. And so that's what we went through a phase of. I think that right now, if you guys go out in the marketplace and you start getting these Merlots, they're going to be the top of the tops. And to be really honest, in a lot of the competitions I've done recently, they're right up there at the tops. They're making it to the final round of the competitions because they're so good, but you've got to have sites. So the best wines of the world are all reflective of sites where they are based. This is a great site. As I said, these are vines right behind us, these Merlot vines and Cabernet vines up to the distance, and also up on the side of the hill here, are amazing. Why is Knights Valley so secret? It's because there's no wineries here, actually, or no wineries you can get into. You can't really get into Peter Michael, even though he's right across the road from us. It's very hard to get in there. Beringer is probably one of the great trademarks of this area, even though they bought into it a little bit later, even after you were really involved in this. And the fact is that this vineyard was designed by the same man who designed the Peter Michael vineyard.
And the Beringer.
And the Beringer vineyard. So there's something very special about this site, and this is such a small brand. This is Petrified Forest Vineyards, and You know, let's tell everyone a little bit about the Totem Ridge Vineyards. Like that's when I drove in, I pushed the little buttons, and here the gate opens. It says Totem Ridge Vineyards. What's that all about?
Well, you know, it's really a very interesting story, and I don't have all the pieces because I wasn't here in the early 1900s. My father might have been, but I wasn't. Uh, this property was owned by a doctor by the name of Gibbon, whose daughter married a man by the name of Booth, and it became the Booth Ranch. And Mr. Booth was a carver, if you will. So he had created totem poles all over this property. We have at least 20 totem poles, all in redwood, that have been preserved over the years because of the durability of redwoods. And these totem poles have survived since the early 1900s. I think the earliest one is 1903.
Yeah, and there's a 1918 just as I
We
walked
have
up to your, and it's actually your column walking up to the building.
It is. For some reason, I don't
Crazy.
know what he did to foo dogs that graced the entryway in China, but he had lizards and owls and all sorts of other characters that were mythical and in many ways like the gargoyles in Europe. And I don't know what he was doing during the First World War, but I do know for sure he was carving totem poles.
I don't pair very well with gargoyles, but I pair extremely well with totem poles. I just want you guys to know that,
Yeah.
just so you know.
So that is exactly why we call it Totem Ridge, and because it is a ridge, basically a ridge with a northern facing exposure, and you know it captivated us from day one.
Yeah, it's a fantastic piece of property. So we're kind of north facing here, and actually the original vineyard is right up here, and so you've got this Merlot. It is a wonderful climate. Here we are in the kind of the mid-afternoon. It is warm. It's not stinking hot because sometimes it can get hot here, and you could grow Zinfandel here. Storybook is just down the street from us here.
Speedy
If you know
Creek.
Speedy Creek, some of the best Zinfandel vineyards around. But this has got that breeze that's coming out of the forest right up here on the Mayacamas. And it's a very interesting thing because this plot that you talked about with the Booth family and everything, those buildings are still on this property. We're not just going to go in there and have dinner there because they are a little bit dilapidated because they were built a long, long time ago. But the fact is that they picked an amazing site, and you guys picked an amazing site. This is 1986. Back then, it was really interesting. 2009 was when you started the amazing label, the Petrified Forest Vineyards. And, you know, I got the chance because this is kind of the ceremonial 30-year anniversary of, you know, really making the first wines on this property and the planting of the grapes and all these things come together. But I got to taste through the last 6 vintages from the 17s backwards, and I've been having the greatest time just talking it over with you and about how these vineyards have matured. But also, we're going to talk in a minute, not yet, about the amazing Sauvignon Blanc late harvest that can get up there with the top of the world. So, you know, this first wine right here, this is an amazing vintage. So for all of you out there, this is the 2011 vintage, which was disputable for a lot of people. Just because I feel like that there was, you know, when people cut the canopy down, because it was a very cool vintage, they cut the canopy down and exposed the vineyard to all of this. You didn't need that up here because you were already it was just maturing slowly. I feel like that's your philosophy inside the bottle too, is to release a little bit later than most people, but also let it hang on the vine while it can. And you've got a neat place here to do that.
Well, you know, unfortunately, you know, a lot of the history of a vintage is determined by the critics, not by the growers. And the growers can give you a different perspective on things. And as a grower, one of the important variables in making a fine wine is the hang time. In other words, the amount of time that the vines need to have the fruit sitting before they're picked, and at the sacrifice of the acidity, which of course is determined mostly by how cold it is at night. So in 2011, which was a cold year and created conditions which for most varietals were unfavorable because it was so cold, for Merlot, in the location of ours, it was ideal. And I have to tell you that I think it created conditions that allowed us to have the best Merlot we've ever had in 2011. It allowed the vines to have the fruit sitting out there cold at night, but allowing the flavors to mature. And in 2011, we made a Merlot that I think is probably the finest Merlot we've ever made on this property. And so, unfortunately, the wine industry is defined in large part by those people who are pushing the narrative. But if you ask the growers, it's often a different story. And I would encourage you to at least try the 2011 without the bias that's built into the
I think this is
narrative.
this is so showy for 2011, whereas and it really is indicative of where we're at. This is Knights Valley. This is a place of origin, but not that many people know about it.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a reason why Peter Michael and Behringer and other vineyard owners here became so popular for that. This is not a big production winery. I mean, you guys produce just a few hundred cases of
Mm-hmm.
each wine. And I feel like that's what really got me into this, is that you let the vineyard speak inside each one of these bottles. And I think that the great thing about wonderful sites is how well they are interpreted by the vintage. I feel like this 11 is a killer. I mean, we just sat there, we were eating fine charcuterie with it and having a really great discussions. And that's what great wines will do. It's not just how great it is in the mouth, because it is there, all there. But it's also how it kind of takes you to that different thing. It brings out the person inside of you to share some stories with everyone else. And I feel like that's a great example. I also feel the same way about this 14, because we're going to taste this 14 now. And this is, from this vineyard, this 14 and 16 vintages are so wonderful and open themselves up to everyone. It's like, you might know this vineyard, but they want to be your friends, even though they can't be there with you. They can show it to you through this is the way to do it, is through the glass, and you can feel this vineyard in this glass. And I feel like this is really the one, when I did the reviews of your wines, they were all in the 90s. And I mean, really one of the reasons you would say, like, it's not 90s, and there's just not much integrity there. The complexity isn't there. The sense of sight isn't there. Oh, these are packed with all of those things. So that's what I love about this brand. And it's so small, and it's right across the road from, Peter Michael and everything around us here. But it's really about this hillside. It's not about their hillside, even though we're all in the same area together. But it's about the weather conditions, it's about the soil conditions, it's about a sense of place and time. And these vintages really exemplify that.
Well,
Absolutely.
the romanticism of wine displays that element of chance,
Yeah.
that on which the universe basically is based. And even on this property itself, you can walk around and go up to the upper vineyard and find that you hit a spot where there's 30 degrees difference in the temperature from one spot to the other. And those minute changes, which are unique to the site, are what define the uniqueness of your grapes.
Yeah, I think that the one trademark that I like about this 14 so much, and it goes on to the 16 as well, is acidity. We got bright acidity. You're not adding things into this. And acidity, if you don't have acid in wine, it's grape juice. That's basically it. And I wouldn't cook with it, to be really honest. It's not about the alcohol. It's just like, you got to act like wine if you're going to be wine. And if you don't have acidity, what's the point? you know, and I feel like this is why this little secret thing is going on up here at this vineyard, and why those great winemakers that helped you and growers that helped you and advised you here, they were thinking the right thought about where you were going to go. And it's not rocket science. It's about just a sense of a site,
and letting the site do what it wants to do.
Yeah. Don't interpret the site for it with a bunch of oak. That's not the way to go to really talk about the site. It's really about who is this site, and if you cover it up too much, and if you put a mask on it like we've been wearing a lot lately, do you know who that person is? Do you really? Or do you really just want to be true about the site? And I feel like these are the secrets of small vineyards like this vineyard, the Petrified Forest Vineyard brand, and the Totem Ridge Vineyard. And this 16 too is the same thing, where it's not machismo, but it's not a soft Merlot that just says, oh God, that's so good. It's more like it stops you in your track and you're like, oh wow, hi, how's it going? It's got a little bit of you want to be its friend, but you need to find out some stuff about it first. And that's why you taste it slow. And as it develops, you start to learn. We were talking about a great movie that we love, Name of the Rose. If you guys have ever seen Name of the Rose, one of the greatest movies ever made. And I
agree.
We found out that we are super friends, not just friends. But Name of the Rose is a great movie. It goes back to medieval times and a secret thing that was going on with Sherlock Holmes of the medieval times. And that was the great thing, played by the great Sean Connery, who just turned 90 years old recently.
That's right.
And also Christian Slater, that was in that, one of the great movies in my life that changed my life for many reasons. But it's also just the fact that as you watch a great movie, and I think we're watching a lot of great movies right now, especially in 2020, because we're home a lot. Sorry to say that, you guys. But you want a wine that continues to develop in the glass, because if it stays that same way and the movie develops and your wine isn't developing, it's not a great pairing. It really isn't. It's really about how things happen inside the glass, just like a great movie happens. And so I feel like these are the wines, like especially from Merlot. This is one of the great examples of a small boutique label that really knows what they're doing with these grapes, and you're not taking the winemaker process and, oh, you know what, you want barrels I got in here. Who cares? Where's it grown? Let's find that out inside this glass. This is a really nice wine.
Thank you.
Thank you. We like it.
Deep, rich, sexy, but rustic too. I mean, this has got that rustic feel. When you see these trees behind us, I see the same thing right in front of us too here. And there's the Spanish moss right behind us here, and this is all influence here. When I look at one of the great lessons I ever learned is right across the street from here at Peter Michael, and it's Luc Morlaix, the great Luc Morlaix.
Who's our neighbor, by the way.
Yeah, he was an amazing guy. But he took me, when I went to visit them originally some years ago, I mean, we're talking about 15, 20 years ago, he took me up on the hill. He didn't stop, and we didn't look and taste the clusters or anything like that. He just kind of kept driving right up onto the mountain. He said, Chris, I want you to get out of the car. When we went into this like weird kind of thing with chaparral all around us, and I said, oh, really? And I thought the Deliverance song was going to play and everything. But it didn't. But the fact was, he wanted me to smell the smell of the forest, because that is what influenced their flavor profile. It's not just the grapes, it's what's around you. And that's why forest is a big deal. And this is the exemplary wine that fits that. I mean, I think that it's across the street at Peter Michael, and it's also right here in this glass. This is Knights Valley, but this is an amazing thing. And I think that especially this is accessible. That is not accessible, even though I love them.
True.
But you got to be a Somm to get a hold of their stuff. this is amazing stuff that everyone could put this on their table, and that's what makes me excited about your brand.
And that's
Well, thank
that's
you.
part of our mission, which is not to create a wine that is inaccessible to most people.
Right.
We really want to make a wine that people enjoy drinking and can afford.
Right. Exactly. So, in the last segment that we did, we talked a little bit about Sauvignon Blanc and why you guys moved in here, and there's Sauvignon Blanc planted here. And it's a fascinating thing to really study Sauvignon Blanc in California and what we've done. But I want you guys, on the screen to see the difference in color here. So if you can see that, there's a little bit of difference. This one over here is definitely darker, more honey, orange, and this one is definitely more golden, light gold. And I feel like this is an interesting thing because we're talking about two extremely different vintages here. We're talking about 09, the first year this is the first vintage you ever released under this label. And this one is your 13, which is just one of the most magnificent vintages of California history. And you know what? They're distinctive and wonderful. I would pair them both with different things during the evening. If I had both these little halvesies in my hand. But I think that this is the real experience with what can America do with sweet wines.
Well,
interesting.
Yeah, it's an interesting discussion. This property is unique because we're backed up against a mountain where we get shade late in the summer, which allows us to get the development of fungi such as the noble rot or botrytis, and we get one of the heaviest stands of botrytis that anybody has ever discussed in California, which allows us to have the opportunity to make a dessert wine if the weather conditions are correct. Now, I got turned on to dessert wines because of the family in St. Helena.
Which one? I mean,
yeah.
I mean,
I'll think of it in a
not the
second.
Jaegers or anything, but
Nightingales.
the Nightingales.
The
Well, the
Nightingales.
Nightingales from the Behringer
From the Beringers.
legacy, of
And,
course.
yes, and of course, Paul van der Schelle turned me on to
Nigel.
how they inoculated their stuff. So I got interested in it, and it became a passion of mine because if you want to make a dessert wine, it's the most difficult wine to make.
Yeah.
It is. The conditions have to be ideal, and then once you have your conditions correct and your botrytis and your sugars all lined up, it's still impossible to make it. So it became a challenge. I made a vintage of my own, and then we decided to wait until the conditions were right, which was 2009 and 2013 when we got a heavy early rain, which allowed the botrytis to start. And it's not a financial endeavor, it's a passionate endeavor.
Absolutely.
It's about just trying to do what nature has offered you. And quite frankly, if nobody ever bought this wine, I'd still be happy.
I'd be happy if he gave me some. Yeah, just saying. I love this stuff. But let me go back a little bit. So Sauvignon Blanc, I don't know if you two know this. I don't think I've told you this, but the first ever bottling of wine in California where the varietal was on the label was Sauvignon Blanc. It's back in the 1930s by Wente Vineyards.
Wow.
And Nightingale came from that school of Wente Vineyards, and he brought those cuttings from Wente, and this is where it all kind of came from. So it has a lot more Wentes, love you, but it just has so much more to do with the way that America thought back then. This is not your typical thing for most Americans, though, but our food culture wasn't there yet. You think about going back even to after World War II, when the fighters came back, when the military came back, what were they drinking? A bunch of beer because they went to Germany, of course, and spirits and things like that were very different that they had experienced over there. They were much more, like that was much more of the what you drank,
Mm.
you know, and liqueurs and things like that. So we had a sweet tooth still, and I think that we tried to get against the sweet tooth by all the nouveau food that we have, which your Sauvignon Blanc, I don't want it to be sweet because it's great. We were just talking about some of the great pairings with that. But when you get into fine blue cheeses, not goat cheese, which is a Sauvignon Blanc pairing, blue cheese, now we're talking, because we're talking salty, you know, kind of substance there. We're talking about things that you go, are you really going to push it? Oh, yeah, we're going to push it. And we're going to do it with this because that's the way that we should be doing it, is having these experiences, you know, and finding these brands that can help us take us there. And I think this is a really good example of one that I think for, you know, for this '09 vintage, this is holding up extremely well. And I mean, its density, its lovability, you know. This is why I would buy a number of these bottles, because I would share it with people when it's young, but then I would also age it like this '09 is tasting extremely good now. What year is this again? 2020. It's tasting really good, you guys. Done. Okay, moving on. Okay, let's talk about the 2013. So 2013, really one of the most epic vintages ever in California, just because it was just the balance. It's a vintage of balance, and I think that this is a really good example of what you can do with a sweet version of Sauvignon Blanc. Remember, when we talk about sweet version of Sauvignon Blanc, you don't get us mixed up with, you know, German Riesling
or off dry,
or things that are phony. You know, like it says, you know, it's like a dry brut, you know, from Champagne, which is actually sweet, which doesn't make any sense at all. But this is really one of those things that's really modeled after Bordeaux. This is the style of Bordeaux, and in particular, Sauternes. Sauternes, Chateau Yquem, we think about that as being the benchmark of what a sweet wine is if you make it with Sauvignon Blanc. And I've really fallen in love with this style that you guys make. And this is something that's really special. You bought Sauvignon Blanc when you bought this property. These vines were here, but it's also where you planted it and why this botrytis is so important. And botrytis, for everyone out there that doesn't know botrytis. So imagine this grape variety right here, which is Sauvignon Blanc. Sorry, I gotta move up here. Okay, so imagine this Sauvignon Blanc grape, which is what it is. And it's sitting here, and we're having a good time with this. But imagine rain coming in and taking the middle of this and sticking right there where the wind blows everything off the sides, but the water is still in there, and it's starting a mold. And there's a mold going on in there, and it's kind of starting to go like that. It starts to shrivel the grapes. The shriveling of the grapes is the key here, because it's the intensity of the fruit flavors are really captured inside there, because a lot of it's just burning off. But
it's essentially dehydrating the grape.
It's dehydrating.
Which is what they do.
Don't do that to yourself, please. Don't replicate
in
this
fact,
at home.
It's how the
No
ice,
Clorox, you guys.
It's what the
Clorox
ice,
free.
the ice wines do by dehydrating it and then breaking the ice off, which of course does not enhance the flavors like the presence of mold on the outside, which not only dehydrates but imparts its flavors to the grape.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that's the most important thing. And we learn these lessons from Bordeaux. I mean, like, this is the area for it. We do, you know, Vouvray in the Loire Valley. You're talking more about Chenin Blanc, whereas really this is really the grape variety that's